All right, Braves fans, let's get rolling. This is State of the Braves. I'm George McNair. The Braves are kind of back on track, guys, after about 10 days of struggling, especially with starting pitching. And maybe it was even more than that coming out of the All-Star break. The Braves starting pitching had been one of the worst in baseball, honestly, during that time period. But they have bounced back in a huge way over the last 4 games specifically. And the Braves generally have been playing really well as they dominated the city of New York, taking 3 out of 4 from the Mets, then sweeping the Yankees. And now they welcome the Giants into town. They took the first game from the Giants last night as well. So the Braves playing really well, back on track in a lot of ways, and it's really good to see that. We're going to talk about the starting pitching particularly today. It was also a fun game. If you got to watch especially the pregame stuff for the game last night against the Giants. The Braves are celebrating their alumni weekend. That's always really cool, especially if you've been a Braves fan for decades. Then you get to see all of the old Braves that you cheered for over time, and even some of the much older Braves. In terms of my Braves fandom, I really have a great appreciation for Dale Murphy. Never got to see him play. He came or he left right before I started watching the Braves, but have a huge amount of respect for him and um, and all of those older Braves that we got to see last night. So that was really cool. I did want to mention that and just how fun it was. Brandon Gaudin, I've really enjoyed him being in the booth this year and him growing up as a Braves fan. I think it adds another layer of cool to watch the broadcast and see his reactions. He was obviously geeking out all night long with the Braves, with the old Braves being in the booth most of the night. So that was just really cool. It's a reminder of how fortunate we are as Braves fans to have such a great legacy of Braves players in the past, and especially when you're talking about the Braves of the 90s and the 2000s and that great run of 14 straight division titles and of course the 95 World Series and those memories. But even the guys who came before in the booth last night, again, Dale Murphy, Glenn Hubbard was another guy they talked to for a little bit. Javi Lopez was in the booth, and Steve Avery. And I wanted to particularly talk about Steve Avery a little bit. Before I do that, though, if you missed it, Dale Murphy almost lost his life trying to take a selfie last night. That was funny. The fact that he's standing on this chair. I don't know how old Dale is now. He's probably in his mid 60s, but he about took a tumble off of the back of the chair, and luckily kind of caught himself, and a couple other people were there to catch him as well. But Dale, glad you're okay. And maybe get something other than a chair to stand on next time for a little more uh, solid solid foundation. But yeah, Steve Avery was also in the booth a little bit, and man, that one really took me back and made me think. And I've thought about Steve Avery several times, just what could have been. And he was, if you remember back in the early 90s, his early career was awesome. I mean, maybe even on Hall of Fame trajectory. Uh, the guy debuted at the age of 20 as a starter for the Braves in 1990. Of course, the Braves weren't very good in 90, but he basically took off as the Braves took off as an organization, as a team in 1991. His age 21 year, of course, they made it all the way to the World Series. He finished sixth in the Cy Young voting as a 21-year-old that year. His ERA was in the low threes. And then in his third season, he made the All-Star team. His second season was just as good as the other two, but he got no run support, and he only went 11-11 that year. But every year he was in the high twos, low threes in ERA in his first 3 years. Again, 21, 22, and 23-year-old seasons. Over those first 3 years, his record was 47-25. And so, yeah, everything just looked like Steve Avery was going to be a perennial all-star on a great Braves team. And what happened? A shoulder injury, basically. He had a couple different stints on the injured list. he never had long stints. If you look at his career, he basically has 10 straight years of making pretty consistent starts, but you can see his ERA goes up and up and up over those later years, and he just was never really the same pitcher after basically I think the injury started happening in 94. 95 he struggled through, um, and 96 was his last year with the Braves. He was never terrible with the Braves, but you're seeing more of like mid to high four ERA stuff from Avery. And then, he moved on to Boston and Cincinnati and made one comeback. And after being out of the game for 2 years, he made a comeback with the Tigers in 2003. Just made some appearances out of the bullpen in that season. And, honestly wasn't very good at that point and was out of the game after '03. But Steve Avery was one. I mean, again, you look and you hear Smoltz and Glavine talk a lot about nothing in their early career would have shouted that they were going to be Hall of Fame pitchers. Um, and there was failure early on, and they kind of figured it out. And if you look at those early years, Steve Avery might have been the best of the three. I mean, Glavine and Smoltz had been up in the big leagues a little before Avery. They were a little older. I think, of course, Glavine had a Cy Young season in 91, and Smoltz had already been an all-star before that. So they were a little more established. But Avery was the young guy coming up with a lot of fanfare and timing it in a way that, if he had stayed healthy through all of the 90s and early 2000s, I mean, he would have been racking up wins and maybe even being on a Hall of Fame trajectory in the same way that Smoltz and Glavine ended up being. So I always think about Avery as the guy who, what could have been and maybe what could have been for the Braves in terms of winning more World Series. If you have a healthy Steve Avery with Maddox and Glavine and Smoltz through all those years, I mean, you are just talking about dominance, even on a bigger level than what they did. But that being said, I mean, I think Avery probably has had to deal with those what ifs, and he seems to be in a good place. But the one thing or one of the things I remember being really happy about, even as a kid watching the 95 World Series and the Braves winning it, was that Avery had such a tough year and he was able to contribute. He had a huge start in Game 4. I think it was Game 4 of the World Series. Pitched, I think, 6 innings, 1 earned run. The Braves get that win, and of course, obviously, eventually win the World Series. But it was a huge start for him because, again, he had not been good pretty much all year, and he came up huge against. Remember that Cleveland Indians offense was just absurd. So I remember being particularly happy for Avery. He had been, of course, a member of that core group of Braves through all of that run, and he was able to contribute to that World Series. And he has that World Series ring, even if maybe he didn't end up being a Hall of Fame pitcher or a perennial All-Star pitcher like it looked like he would be. He just made that one All-Star team in '93. But it's not hard to imagine Avery being a 200 plus game winner if he had stayed healthy with the Braves through all of the 90s and early 2000s. He definitely could have racked up a lot of wins just like Glavine and Maddox did, and Smoltz as well. So anyways, it was cool to see Steve Avery. It just kind of took me down memory lane a little bit, and I want to take a few minutes to talk about him and just it was also interesting. He mentioned that his son works for the Braves in the ticketing office. I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, it was cool to see him, and it brought me back a little bit. All right. Well, talking about Steve Avery, we're talking about pitching, and let's get to the current Braves pitching staff. Remember that the Braves have really struggled since the All-Star break with their starting pitching. We've talked about that a good bit, but these last 4 games have been an awesome bounce back. And not that Fried needed to bounce back, but of course, just him coming back from injury. This was just another stepping stone for him. Of course, his very first start in Chicago went incredibly well. His second start was okay, probably a little disappointing on his end, though I thought he still pitched well. And then this start, Fried goes 6 innings, allows two earned runs and 8 hits. So maybe a few more hits than he would like to allow. The most interesting thing about Fried's start was the fact that he talked his way back into the game. So he'd gone 6 innings. He goes back to the dugout. I think he was around 78, 79 pitches. And it was pretty clear that Snicker wanted him to be done for the night. He talks his way back into the game, which if you were, if you've watched Fried over the years, that's not surprising that he would do that. And Snicker allowed him to go back into the game. The weird thing to me, and I mean, I'm totally on board with Fried here, is that since he's been back, the Braves have really not allowed him to go beyond 80 pitches at all. And that was about the mark that he threw in AAA in his last start or two, right around 80 pitches. And so it is a little odd that they won't let him go beyond that number. I think that's kind of where Fried was at. He wanted to go a little beyond, push himself. He was probably feeling pretty good at the time. So he goes back in to the 6th inning. It's a short at bat. A guy gets a hit. And I think he ended the night with around 82, 83 pitches. So he still really didn't get much beyond what he had done in the past. So I'm really hoping and looking forward to Fried's next start and maybe him getting into, the high 80s, low 90s, and hopefully he can get stretched out a little bit more. I mean, the fact is you want Fried totally stretched and ready for the postseason. And I do understand the Braves being careful with that. But I also hope that they trust Fried enough to let them know how he's feeling and that he can go a little longer. So that one was, interesting to watch. Obviously, the Braves are really going to be leaning on him moving forward. But Morton and Elder are also really important to this team, and they have not pitched well lately, and they both really pitched well in their last starts. Elder ends up only allowing 1 hit over 7 innings. He did walk a few, but he got double plays to basically erase almost every batter that was able to get on base in this game. So double play magic from Bryce Elder, and that's when he's going good. He's getting the ball more on the ground than in the air. If he's allowing balls in the air, they might go over the fence. We've seen that from time to time. So he was mostly in the zone and getting those ground balls and double plays, and Elder is able to bounce back in a big way in his last start. And then Charlie Morton goes up against the Yankees as well and gets his mojo back in a big way. Remember, Morton had allowed 7 walks, even though he didn't allow a run against the Mets. He had allowed 7 walks and only went 5 innings in his last start. And that's not a one-off. Really, his last 4 starts had been full of walks, and clearly him kind of searching for his release point and his command, and he had not found it. Well, he found it in this game against the Yankees in a big way. I mean, he really dominated a Yankees team that, while it's not a great offense, you do still have to navigate Aaron Judge, and he made Aaron Judge look silly on a couple of occasions here. So 10 strikeouts, only 1 walk, very importantly. And what it looked like is Morton was establishing his fastball early, and his curveball really got dominant late because his fastball had been established and mostly in the zone. The Braves just need this type of Morton for the playoffs. If Morton is pitching this way, he is a very good number 3, playing off of course, Fried and Strider. And hopefully this is something that Morton can take into his next start and beyond. I was watching Tom Glavine on High Heat, which is not a show I regularly watch, but actually I just watched the clip, and you can find that on MLB.com on the Braves website. But he was talking to Mad Dog, I forget the guy's actual name, sorry, but and they were actually talking about Verlander, Justin Verlander. Does Glavine think he can get to 300 games? But I thought it applied to Morton a lot. So Glavine basically said, and Glavine would know this because he pitched into his 40s. Glavine said the older you get, it's not just about losing velocity, but it's about losing feel for your pitches. Your command can come and go a little bit more. You can lose your release point a little bit more. So any of you guys who are 40 beyond, I've 40 here recently, you do start losing a little bit of, just the way you could do things. It starts to wane just a little bit. I mean, it's not always really noticeable, but little things don't work quite as well as they used to. And it makes a lot of sense to me that as a 40-year-old pitcher like Charlie Morton is just about to turn 40, this is why maybe his release point and his mechanics and command are slipping and not quite as consistent as they used to be. And he's always been a guy, really since he's been with the Braves, where his command is kind of, it comes and goes at times, but it has really seemed to come and go a little bit more this year for some reason. But still, when Morton is good, he's really good, and you just don't know what you're gonna get. Now, the thing about Morton in the playoffs is Snitker can have a quicker trigger to pull him. If you're not getting the good version of Charlie Morton, you can pull him early and maybe still win that game. But hopefully, Morton is going to lock things in and going to be a little bit more of the dominant Charlie Morton that we know can happen. All right, then Spencer Strider went last night against the Giants. He'd actually struggled. I think he'd only had 2 starts before this against the Giants in his career, but he'd struggled against the Giants in his other 2 starts, but he did not struggle last night. 7 innings pitched, 10 strikeouts, just 1 hit allowed. I mean, the Braves pitching, you talk about just flipping the script, going from struggling mightily to some really dominant performances. The Braves with this game have now pitched 3 straight shutouts, 2 against the Yankees and 1 against the Giants. And Strider just reminds us when he is locked in, he is the best pitcher in baseball. And I've talked about this a lot, but with him, to me, it's all about command and controlling that fastball, particularly in the zone where he needs to put it. And what I mean by that is staying away from that middle third of the plate. When we're talking about north-south, that middle third of the plate, staying away from that. And he was in the upper third and lower third a lot with his fastball last night. And then his slider was starting in the zone and finishing out of the zone. And he was basically unhittable last night. And he reminds you that he is still in the Cy Young race with this type of outing. If Strider is able to do anything close to what he did last night throughout the rest of this season, I think he wins the Cy Young. Right now, to me, there's a kind of crowded field of Cy Young candidates, but there's no one who's clearly separated themselves and is like the obvious front runner for Cy Young. Strider, to me, if he could get his ERA somewhere below 3.30, I think he's got a good chance of winning it because all of his other peripheral stats, including strikeouts, are so off the charts great. He's currently at a 3.57 ERA. Remember, he's had about 3 really bad starts this year that have ballooned his ERA, kind of probably where it shouldn't be, but he does have 227 strikeouts, which is way higher than anyone else in the National League. So yeah, to me, if the ERA is at least reasonably strong, and to me that's 3.30. I mean, maybe he could get it below that, but obviously, if he could get somewhere around there, I think Strider really could get back into. I think he's already in the Cy Young discussion, but probably be the favorite for the Cy Young if that ERA starts looking better. All right, another thing that's been going on recently, Ozzie Albies goes down, not really with an injury per se. He is on the 10-day IL, but he was having hamstring cramping several games ago. I think he's been out now 4 games. It's a little disappointing just because Ozzie was playing so great. He was one of those 4 guys who'd played every game this year. So obviously that streak has snapped. And it would have been cool for him to play every game because, of course, last year was just an injury-riddled year for him. But certainly the Braves are being cautious to have him healthy in September and October, of course. But Ozzie was playing great. His last 15 games before injury, he was hitting .323 with a .600 slugging percentage. He'd hit 4 home runs in those 16 or 15 games and was just playing his best baseball of the season. So it's poorly timed. But it's probably an abundance of caution for the Braves. Again, the report was it was hamstring cramping. It was not a strain. But anyone who's had some cramping going on knows that can tire your muscle, and then that can lead to a strain. And so I certainly understand that happening. Or there could be a small strain in the leg, and that's what's causing cramping. So anyways, a hamstring cramp is not fun. Hopefully Ozzie's not dealing with those on a daily basis, but I do understand the Braves being cautious with that. So what happened with that is, of course, it created a place in on the roster. It created a roster spot, and Vaughn Grissom was called up, and then immediately you're thinking, because Grissom has been just dominating AAA this year, you're thinking that Grissom is going to be slotted in to that spot and get some starts, which would be really cool for him since he's been in AAA all year. But instead, Snitker goes with Nicky Lopez over Vaughn Grissom. Lopez, of course, in his first 2 games, just had some remarkable performances. Has not done much offensively over the next 2 games, but you do, despite anything that Lopez is doing on the field, and he is a really good defensive player, especially, but you do wonder why Snitker would go with Nicky Lopez over Grissom. I mean, the obvious on paper decision is you're choosing Lopez's defense over Grissom's offense, or at least that's the choice that a manager generally would make. Even though it sounds like Grissom's defense has been a lot better over the last month or so down at AAA. Look, Grissom's AAA stats, I'm telling you, he's hitting well in AAA this year. I mean, that's an understatement. He basically a full season's worth of play. Grissom is hitting .327 with a .412 on-base percentage. He's only hit 6 home runs, so his power hasn't been on display much, but he's hit 32 doubles. So his slugging percentage is still really high. He's just not hitting a ton of homers. And this is not a one-off. This is really his 3rd full season of minor league play, and his career minor league stats are all right around this. He's a career .312 hitter in the minor leagues. He actually hit more home runs last year than this year, but very similar slugging percentage. Grissom is a very good offensive player, no doubt. And even when he was up early this season for a few games, he wasn't doing much in the power department, but he was still getting on base and hitting for a pretty high average. So, a lot of people are viewing Grissom coming up but not playing as a clear sign that he's going to be traded in the offseason. I'm still not sure of that. I don't see Grissom not playing as a definitive statement by the Braves that he's going to be traded. But what I do think it's doing is it's locking Grissom's trade value in a little bit more. So if he's up with the big league club for the rest of the season, which I think is likely with the expansion of rosters in September coming up, it does lock Grissom's trade value in, right? He's had this great AAA season. So if they do trade him in the offseason, right, you're working off of just really awesome AAA offensive numbers. Like I said, he's been playing better defensively. So a team that would look to trade for him, they're going to have to pay up a little bit more, right? Because, I mean, what if Grissom slumped in the last several weeks of AAA? Obviously, his trade value would go down a little bit. So that's where a lot of people are reading this, right? You bring him up, you lock in his trade value, and then you're going to trade him in the off season. And while I do think that's a possibility, I don't think it's the only possibility. And I don't even know if the Braves know what's going to happen. I think they are playing all of the potential, outcomes at the same time, right? So I think Grissom will impact the Braves in 2024, but in what way, right? There's 2 big potentials to me in seeing Vaughn Grissom's future down the line. Of course, number one, again, is that he is traded, right? And that, of course, would impact the Braves by the Braves getting another player, and very likely it would be a pitcher, right? The Braves could get another controllable starter in preparation for Max Fried, probably leaving for free agency after next year. Or the other option is Vaughn Grissom is your 2024 starting left fielder. Now, I have said for a while I would like to see Grissom in left field. The Braves have done nothing to prepare him for that, right? He has played not 1 inning of the outfield this year. He's continued to play shortstop. Again, that helps trade value when teams can see that he can play a legitimate shortstop. But in the off season, the roster is tackled as a whole. There's a lot of moving pieces. Do the Braves bring back an Eddie Rosario? Maybe Max Fried does sign an extension, and now you don't need to go look for a starter long term. All of these things could be in play, and if the Braves are looking to save a little money by not bringing back Rosario on his $9 million extension, then maybe they do explore Grissom in left field at that point. You would have a full offseason for him to work and prepare for left field, and then, of course, spring training as well. So I think the Braves understand that there are multiple things that could happen that would cause them to keep Grissom. He is a very good player. I do think they value him generally. I've told you guys this. I'm a big fan of Vaughn Grissom. I really think he's a big leaguer and a really good hitter and someone you would like to have in your organization long term. I don't think obviously Eddie Rosario or Ozuna are going to be in Atlanta beyond next year. And again, Rosario, it's kind of a question mark whether the Braves will bring him back. So having a really good young hitter like Vaughn Grissom to me has a lot of value. But it is clear that the Braves are going to need to address some starting pitching over this offseason. You only have one more year of Max Fried. You have 1 year extension that you could give to Charlie Morton. That's $20 million. Maybe that's how he finishes this season is going to determine that. You don't fully know the health long term of Kyle Wright. So there's a lot of question marks with that pitching staff. And if you need to trade Vaughn Grissom to address that, it is understandable. So all of that is in play. All right, guys. So over the last several games, I have noticed, and I just wanted to mention this contrast of the Braves and a couple of their opponents and how it just highlights how good the Braves are. You know, the Braves played the Yankees. They seem to get a lot more national play just because they're playing the Yankees. I'm annoyed by that in some ways, but it's also good that at least people are talking about the Braves more and how much they dominated New York. But the first thing that stands out is how slow and plodding and old the Yankees look and how fast and athletic the Braves look in comparison. Aaron Judge is a tremendous player. He's dealing with a toe injury. He can barely get down the line. Giancarlo Stanton is as slow as you could ever get. I mean, injuries have zapped him of any athleticism he maybe used to have. They do have some young players. Volpe at shortstop looked pretty impressive, but beyond that, they just are not a good offensive team, and they are a very slow team and unathletic team generally. The Yankees have a few stars in their lineup and then just a lot of nothing. And the Braves have a deep, full roster of guys who can hit, and you guys know that's true. And then one other thing that is true is the Yankees playing in New York, the pressure that's put on them, they clearly have a very tense clubhouse that's trying to deal with expectations. They're likely going to miss the playoffs for the first time in a while, and they might even end with a losing record, which would be like the first time since maybe 1995 that they've done that. So a tense clubhouse compared to the Braves have probably the loosest, most relaxed, most fun clubhouse in baseball. So it's just a very stark contrast between the two. I think I didn't actually hear him say this. I heard this on the broadcast last night that Aaron Boone said that the Braves and the Atlanta organization is just the top of the class in all of baseball right now. So it's cool to hear a Yankee say that, and I think that's absolutely true. All right, then the Braves playing the Giants last night. The big contrast I recognized was Michael Harris, right, who almost hit for the cycle if he'd hit a home run last night. He's usually your ninth batter, right, batting in the ninth hole. He has the same number of home runs and a higher OPS than the Giants' fourth place hitter, which is Jock Peterson. So to me, it's a reminder just of how good the Braves, and I actually notice this pretty much every opponent they play. I always look at, especially the middle of the order for the opposing team. And, but then you look at the bottom of the order, right? And you have guys who are just not hitting at all, guys with 600 OPS, that sort of thing. And that just doesn't exist for the Braves. Every hitter in the lineup is hovering close to 800 OPS or higher. Probably the lowest hitter in the lineup is Eddie Rosario. who can be ice cold and not give you much for a while, but then he can get hot and be one of the best hitters in the lineup. And he's been on the hotter side of things lately, it feels like. He had a pretty good game last night, too. So, yeah, the Braves lineup, I mean, it gets talked about all the time. It's historic. It's the best lineup for sure right now in baseball, and it's something we should just appreciate. The alumni that the Braves were talking to were just reiterating that, right? It's probably the best Braves lineup that has ever been. It's hard to compare it to any other lineup just because it's so good. All right, guys. So Yanni Chirinos, unfortunately, is going to pitch tonight against the Giants. I talked about Chirinos last time, and I had the theory that Chirinos was going to be held onto through the September call-ups at least, even though he's pitching poorly, and I still think that's what's happening. He pitched a dud of a game in his last outing against the Mets, and yet here he is again. And I think that's why. I think it is possible if he just continues to pitch this bad that he will be gone before September 1st, but I think the Braves are trying their best to just get any kind of innings they can out of him to save the bullpen. And I guess, that's the problem for me, though, is he's not really pitching deep enough into games to save the bullpen that much. I really don't know why you wouldn't have an Alan Winans pitching right now, because I still think he's more intriguing and he's a better option than Chirinos. He obviously pitched great in his last start against New York. I told you guys that I think the Braves don't want to bring up Michael Soroka until he's fully ready. He has been pitching great in AAA, so I do wonder, but maybe they want sustained success for him at AAA for a while before they bring him back up. But Chirinos is a poor match for an innings eater. If that is his purpose on the team, he's not really doing that. I mean, he's getting through 5 innings maybe, but he can really only navigate through a lineup twice. And the numbers dictate that he is terrible when he gets to the lineup a third time. I saw Chirinos in person when I went to the Angels game. That was probably his best game with the Braves. He got through 5 innings really strongly. He goes out for the 6th, and it kind of falls apart. Luckily, the Braves scored 12 runs in that game, so it didn't matter. But that's kind of the guy Chirinos might be at his best, right? At his best, maybe he gets through 4 or 5 innings, mostly unscathed, but get him out of the game after that. And Snitker seems to be unwilling to do it because, again, I think what they're trying to do is let him eat as many innings as possible. But he's not doing that all that well, and he's going against Webb tonight for the Giants, who's been one of the best pitchers in baseball and is also a Cy Young candidate. So this is a particularly poor pitching matchup for the Braves. Their offense has been known to flip the script and not care about that and beat good pitchers anyways, but it's going to be a challenge tonight for sure. Well, guys, that is this episode of State of the Braves. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be back with you soon and talk to you again very shortly. See you later.